In this lecture on the history of the church, we want to consider more in the period of the Christian Empire, of course, the third of the three periods that we've sort of studied this far. And in this period of the Christian Empire, which of course spans an impossibly long time. You realize that I put this from the conversion of Constantine basically until the Protestant Reformation. And really, that's not good history. I apologize to you for making such a broad section. If I was doing a better job in these lectures, I would divide that up into 2 or 3 or maybe 4 different passages. Sometimes we talk about the early Middle Ages and the later Middle Ages and so on and so forth. But just for the sake of time and for getting at our subject and the big concepts, we're considering the period as a whole. We talked about some of the general trends and characteristics of the Christian Empire period. First, that Christianity became officially allowed, then officially supported by the Roman Empire. Secondly, we talked about the phenomenon of Christianity retreating to the monastery and sort of the good and the bad and the useful about the monastic movement. And then thirdly, we looked at the emergence of the Roman Catholic Church and the institution of the papacy. That was the subject of our last lecture. In this lecture, we want to take a look at some of the important events and challenges of this period of the Christian Empire, although we must admit that we're talking about a huge period of time, right? I mean, 1,200 years approximately in the history of Europe. And as I'm going to tick off 5 or 6 important events and challenges, please understand that this is a woefully short list. I mean, I almost apologize for bringing it to you, but I'm just picking out, in my estimation, what are maybe some of the 5 or 6 most notable things for us to consider. First of all, towards the very beginning of this Christian Empire period, you could say that somewhat it began even before, in the later part of the early church period, was this whole phenomenon of the Arian heresy and the Council of Nicaea. So, we've been talking about the later Middle Ages all the way up to the year 1300 and so forth, with Unum Sanctum in our last lecture. Now I want you to rewind about 1,000 years into this very time of the conversion of Constantine and when Christianity's social status and standing first changed within the Roman Empire. They had this very significant challenge of the Arian heresy, and it was responded to by the Council of Nicaea. The Arian heresy began in the early 4th century with a popular elder, what we would call him a pastor of an individual congregation, but a popular elder or pastor in the Christian community at Alexandria, Egypt. Arius, the name of this man, he called himself a Christian, but he emphasized ideas in Greek philosophy and theology, ideas that said that God is completely unique and unknowable. Maybe you're familiar with the idea of the transcendence of God, right? That God is beyond us. Well, if that is emphasized to the point that it is emphasized in some aspects of Greek philosophy, you come to the basic idea that God is unknowable to man, right? God is completely beyond. And then he said that because Jesus lived as a man, and because Jesus could be known, it meant that Jesus could not be God. Arius believed that Jesus was like God, the most God-like of all of God's creatures, but that ultimately Arius believed that Jesus was simply the highest being in the universe next to God, right? Not God, but the highest being in the universe next to God. Now, Arius' teaching had a great appeal for many reasons. First, it was consistent with some deeply ingrained ways of thinking found in Greek culture. Secondly, in Arius' teaching, Jesus was more like one of the divine human heroes of Greek mythology, right? Think of the heroes of Greek mythology, right? Like Hercules and other people who are sort of human, sort of divine. Well, in Arius' theology, this is what Jesus kind of like was. So it appeared to deeply ingrained ways of thinking in Greek culture. Secondly, Arius was an excellent preacher and communicator, right? And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is a wrong message in the mouth of a powerful communicator, right? Third, Arius was very good at what we would call today marketing. He even put some of his central ideas into what we would call jingles, which were on the lips of even the common man. I find it fascinating to think about this, that in this period of the early 4th century, people really cared about theology. And Arius knew how to market his theology to people and put it on their lips. You know, they made up little songs, little ditties, like commercial slogans and little songs that would reinforce these doctrinal ideas, and everybody had them on their minds. Gregory of Nyssa, again from the years 330 to 395, he spoke on the popularity of the Arian debate. He says, if you ask anyone in Constantinople for change, he will start discussing with you whether the Son is begotten or unbegotten. If you ask about the quality of the bread, you'll get the answer, the Father is greater, the Son is less. If you suggest taking a bath, you'll be told, there was nothing before the Son was created. Do you see what he's trying to explain to you? He's trying to say that these theological debates were on the lips of everybody. Now, I just have to say, I read that and it makes me pause and say, what a different world we live in today, right? I mean, today the things of theology, the things of spirituality, the things of God, they are in no way on the lips of common people. But there was a time, and here he's talking about the time, where, you know, if you hopped into a taxi, of course I'm putting it into the modern age, where if you hopped into a taxi and said, you know, take me to such and such an address, the taxi driver would say, hey, what do you think about this whole theological debate? You know, do you think that Jesus is God or not? You know, you'd go to get your hair cut. And the barber would say, you know, I was really thinking about this whole issue, this theological thing. I mean, these things were on the lips and on the minds of people. Well, when Alexander, who was the bishop of Alexandria, condemned and excommunicated Arius, it furthered a huge controversy. Therefore, the Emperor Constantine called together a church council at Nicaea in the year 325 to decide the issue. And you have to say, this must have been an amazing thing, because you have this great controversy, this popular, this eloquent, this dynamic pastor of Alexandria, Egypt, is excommunicated by his bishop. And this starts a huge debate within the body of Christ, within Christendom. And again, as we talked about before, Constantine says, well, it shouldn't be this way. I'm going to step into the middle of this great controversy and see if I can fix it. It's really amazing to think about this. More than 300 bishops from churches all over the world gathered at Nicaea for this conference. Now, I got to say, you know, sometimes you wonder, you know, what would it be like to be get in a time machine and go back to different times and different places in the history of the church. If I could get into a time machine, one of the places I would want to go is to the Council of Nicaea. And let me explain to you why. It's because, remember, this was just after, this was in the recent memory of times of severe persecution in the church. Basically, the council at Nicaea was a gathering of heroes of the faith who had suffered under persecution and who had stood strong for Jesus Christ. There were so many there who had suffered and been tortured for Jesus that it added a special dimension to the conference. These 300 bishops from churches all over the world gathered together at Nicaea. Well, when they were all gathered there, Arius appeared before the council and he made his case. Arius claimed that Jesus was a created being and capable of change, so he could not be God. But the council rightly rejected Arius' teaching. I guess you got to say, you really got to admire the Council of Nicaea for a lot of reasons. I think that when we think about it, for many, many reasons, the Council of Nicaea is very worthy of our praise. It's really one of the high marks in church history. Because here's